Hello and welcome to the IRS Rail webinar session on international rail timetabling, seamless connectivity to attract passengers and freight customers, produced by the International Railway Summit in association with Trenolab. I'm Jules Omura, the Managing Director of IRIDS Events, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this session. So at the last count, we had over 190 people from 44 countries registered for today. Welcome to those of you attending our webinar for the first time, and welcome back if you joined us before. As passengers gradually return to traveling, the green credentials of rail are once again attracting passengers, and governments are also keen to encourage people to travel by train rather than by air or by car. Despite recent improvements in cross-border rail travel, such as the revival of overnight train services in Europe, there's still room to improve passenger experience in order to win the competition with other modes of transport. Many manufacturers are also turning to rail for their shipping needs amid the ongoing global freight congestion and the longer-term zero-carbon targets. But reliability and punctuality need to improve in order to gain customers' trust. Today's debate will explore how rail operators, infrastructure owners, regulators, and IT providers can work together to enable customer-friendly and seamless cross-border timetabling. I'm delighted to have the support of leading opinion makers and innovators as speakers with us today. In particular, we're grateful for the support from Trenolab, which allows us to provide this important debate for anyone to watch for free. Trenolab is an expert in railway operation simulation and data analysis. Their suite of software tools is designed to help railways quickly and effectively solve complex operational problems. Their technical director, Giorgio Medeosi, will be talking us through Trenolab's answers to this complex jigsaw puzzle that is international rail timetabling. I'm equally grateful to Max Berlin from Traffic Market, Kurt Bauer from ÖBB, and Stefan Jugelt from the EU Agents for Railways for sharing their expertise with us today. This is an interactive session. You're invited to participate proactively in the discussion. So you will see on your screen some options to chat. You can chat with your fellow participants or with the other members of with members of the speakers. You can also ask questions in the Q&A section, and you can also vote for other questions from other audience members. And the more popular questions will be asked during the Q&A, during the panel discussion session. There'll be two polls today, so this is an opportunity for you to take part in a sort of interactive features of this webinar. And finally, you will see a handout section where you'll be able to download today's presentations from the three speakers. So do join the debate through these various features that are available. And at the end of the webinar, if you wait for a few seconds, you will see an evaluation form. So do please complete the form, and that will help us improve our webinars in the future. If you miss that one, you will receive an email asking for your evaluation. We're tweeting live during this webinar, so you can follow us at Rail Summit, and please use our hashtag #IRSRailWebinars. If you enjoy the session, do continue the debate on Twitter and LinkedIn. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our guide for today, Karsten Lotz. Karsten is a partner at McKinsey & Company, and he leads their global transport infrastructure work. Within the transport sector, Karsten specializes in rail, and he's deeply committed to advancing the railway industry because of its environmental credentials. This is the second time this year that we work with Karsten. So Karsten, welcome back, and I look forward to today's debate on international rail timetabling, seamless connectivity to attract passengers and freight customers. Karsten, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be back. Welcome to everyone. Welcome to our panelists and our presenters today. We will discuss timetables in railway, which for a long time, at least for me, seemed to be more an art than a science. And I remember vividly standing in front of those yellow and white posters in German stations, trying to figure out when which train would leave, trying to figure out what those little hammers and crosses in before the lines of the trains were, and then finally ending up to understanding something. I must imagine creating those timetables is way more difficult than understanding them. But there seems to be hope. We will learn today something about advanced artificial intelligence that can help to figure out better timetables. We will hear from Austria how you manage international timetables, which is very difficult, I can imagine, especially in a transit land like Austria. And we will hear from Sweden how you satisfy customer needs in a liberalized environment where everyone would like to have the best track for their trains. I'm looking very much forward to this discussion. Before we get into the middle of things, because delay is something that anyone who has to do something with timetable hates, we will have a small poll that will guide us into Mats' presentation. And the question for all of you would be, which of the following is best placed to understand the customer's needs? Is it the railway undertakings, the infrastructure managers, the regulatory bodies, or the Ministry of Transport? I invite you to submit your response. I will do so myself. And then I'm looking forward to Mats to give us a presentation about what they are doing at Traffic Beckett. Just trying. Have we already closed the poll? We have. So you tell us that, and you can see it under polls closed if you look on the right-hand side of your screen. Railway undertaking, 70% of you say those are the people who know best customers' needs. And in the end, even 4 say regulatory bodies, and 5 ministries of transport. There is some hope for public intervention, but the majority of you are convinced that it's the railway undertakings who are closest to final passengers. Mats, what's your perspective about that?
Well, as you will see in my presentation, I strongly advocate that, because we have to listen to the customers, and the railway undertakings are the ones closest to the customer. So I think it's a good result of that poll.
Wonderful. So the floor is yours. We're looking forward to hearing you.
Thank you, Karsten. Thank you for having me. My name is Mats Berlin. I'm the head of capacity management in Trafikverket, the infrastructure manager of Sweden. So what do we do in Sweden when it comes to infrastructure management? Well, you see here is the mission for Trafikverket. The objectives are the basis for the Swedish Transport Administration's mission and act as a guide for our operational direction. The objectives also aim to serve a supporting function and inspire regional and municipal planning. The transport policy objectives mean that the transport system should be designed to make it simple and safe to travel and transport goods, and the impact on climate and environmental should be minimalized. And we have the primarily functional objective, accessibility, to provide an even and equal access to information and services in all of Sweden, and also split equally between genders and so on. And we have some considerations objectives that calls for safe handling, environmental friendly, and improved health aspects of our mission as well. So what happens on the tracks of Sweden any given day? There are some, when it comes to passenger traffic, there are some 420,000 people traveling by train on an average weekday. Some people commute and travel perhaps twice a day, and short distance trains in metropolitan areas account for around 50% of all passenger rail traffic. that is commuter trains and airport shuttle trains. And they are traveling on close to 3,000 trains every day. And here we have some statistics showing the development of the passenger traffic. However you do the calculations, train travel has approximately doubled since the first half of the 1990s up to 2019. But as the chart shows, the pandemic struck hard, and as you see, this is the stats expressed in billions of passenger kilometers. As you can see, it's primarily regional travel that has increased over this time and is now happening on a similar scale to long distance travel. So what about freight then? The freight traffic is also extensive on Swedish tracks. Railways have traditionally handled long-distance transportation of volume goods, such as mineral ore and forest products. But there has been a slight shift in the past decade. Railways now handle more of the goods that used to be transported by road, partly due to greater efficiency in railway transportation. One example is rail freight shuttles that are part of an extensive system of freight terminals in Sweden and Norway, or combined transport, which involves transferring truck trailers. And a quick look at the statistics also for freight. The development is more slow, partly due to the fairly uneven competition from other transport modes, such as trucks. The fact that freight transport via railways affected particularly bad is because railway transportation requires large volumes to maintain profitability. Even a slight decline in freight volumes can make an entire arrangement unprofitable for the train company. Freight transport by road is not as sensitive to these kinds of economic fluctuations. And as you can see in 2008, the downturn there was due to an economic crisis that affected Sweden and the rest of the world. And that crisis was also noticeable within aviation, although not as clear. A quick slide on the Swedish market. We have a mixed traffic in open access in both freight and passenger traffic. Competition is within and between segments. At the moment, for next annual plan, we have 57 applicants, customers, and they are both railway undertakings, transport buyers, and public services. In Sweden, the transport buyers have the option to apply for train paths and get allocated capacity in order to assign a subcontracted railway undertaking at a later stage. And market situation for maintenance and construction services is also competitive. Trafikverket procure maintenance services at 34 railway maintenance contracts, and each is typically for 5 years with 2 years option. And here you can see the brands of many of the companies active on the Swedish infrastructure. In order to make this work, we have to have an extensive planning process. Throughout the planning process, transparency and dialogue remains the fundamental objectives. And as you can see, we have a very long time perspective. Planning is iterated a number of times in several times perspectives, going from the long-term transport policy planning down to the traffic management phase, thus creating a high degree of customer involvement and a high level of transparency. This gives the parties time to identify critical effects of planned investments and maintenance works or other capacity restrictions, and discuss how to settle the situation in the best way. As the plans get more and more detailed, the focus shifts on from what to how. Another good example of how to create seamless connectivity are the rail freight corridors of Europe. We are part of the ScanMed corridor along with 7 other parties. As you know, the rail freight corridors are based on the EU regulations, and the ScanMed corridor running from Scandinavia to the Mediterranean Sea with the involvement of 7 infrastructure managers calls for good dialogue and collaboration. ScanMed rail freight corridor acts as an integrator of international rail freight services by taking responsibility for supporting the furthering of a smooth logistical chain and also development, co-developing with all stakeholders creating innovative services and solutions with increased reliability and simplicity. The rail freight corridors are arteries of Europe, ensuring a free, unhindered flow of goods from north to south and from east to west. In the center of it all, crossing the entire continent, you will find ScanMed rail freight corridor. One of the tools in order to make this work is the PCS system provided by RailNet Europe. It's used as a convenient customer interface. For instance, the majority of the applications for capacity over the Öresund bridge between Sweden and Denmark are handled in the PCS system. This is also a valid application for the national stretch in Sweden, thus avoiding double work for the customer. The PCS is also used by a significant share of the passenger traffic between Sweden and Denmark. So, how to build attractive timetables that provide seamless connectivity to passengers and rail freight customers. Obviously, in an open market, you have to stay closely tuned with the rail undertakings and the transport buyers in order to understand the customer needs in various time perspectives. You also have to secure a transparent process and customer dialogue that enables all stakeholders to understand and react and influence the timetable planning in a good dialogue. And also secure a transparent and coordination mutual planning process between the IMs in order to accomplish a good customer solution, focusing on origin and destination, regardless of any border crossings. And what are the needs for the future then? We have to establish more predictable and uniform processes and requirements. And we perceive that the TTR project by the RNE and FT is a good way to proceed for European infrastructure managers. We have to listen more to the needs and demands of the customer and act accordingly. The needs of the customers will most probably change more rapidly in the future, and we have to address this in a more rapid way. And we also have to establish more means for cooperation between infrastructure managers and other stakeholders in the railway sector. And we have to remember that all that matters in the long run is satisfying the customer needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. We will come to detailed questions later on the panel, and I take advantage from you being well on time that we regain the time in the overall discussion. I would like to introduce Kurt, who's taking us through the challenges of international scheduling of travel. And also, yep.
Carsten, it's Jules here. Kurt's having some technical issues joining. So perhaps while we wait for Kurt to join, perhaps we could go to the third speaker, Giorgio, if that's okay.
Of course, we are agile here. So Giorgio is joining us as a technical director of Trenolab, and he will talk to us about how AI can improve scheduling. And I'm really looking forward to that. I could have a glimpse into his presentation, and we will see what train scheduling has to do with ants finding their way. And it's very inspiring to see how technology can help us to make the most out of existing infrastructure. Really looking forward to that. Jules, can you bring Giorgio to me on stage?
Yes, yes, I think Giorgio is now on stage. If you could turn on your mic and camera. Thank you for being flexible, Giorgio. I believe Kurt is also available now, so hopefully he will join. He will do a presentation after Giorgio.
We'll stay flexible. In the railway, the tracks are a bit what is guiding us. Here we can move a bit on the side. So, Giorgio, very looking forward to your presentation. Tell us what the ants have to do with train scheduling. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you, Carsten. Good morning, all participants. It is great for me to be here to participate in this discussion and to present how Trenolab might support, let's say, railway operations and making timetables more attractive. What we are seeing today is that the timetable is a key element for rail service. This because it is the way a client, a passenger, a freight operator sees what he can, where he can go, how long it will take, and so on. Basically, the timetable converts the potential of the infrastructure and of the rolling stock into services, into real transport. It is really important that train paths are attractive, so running times are as limited as possible, and that they are stable, that trains run without delays, and that running times are the same over the days, independently from whether there are works en route and so on. Obviously, the more a network is complex and the more we are crossing borders, the more this process is complex. And especially this complexity is extreme when it comes to international planning. Timetable, as you all know, is revised every year and updated to meet the changing demand trends. However, the limited time available each year limits the possibility to think out of the box and to develop different solutions from year to year. And the timetables tend to be the result of successive layers instead of a fresh start. A fresh start, instead, would allow having new ideas, translating them into timetables, identifying the potential for offering improved service, additional paths, being more adaptable to planned possessions and other construction works. Obviously, with the current tools, this is not possible because there is simply not enough time available every year to go through this time-consuming process. And here we come to the opportunities offered by algorithms, and in this case, by artificial intelligence. In fact, a process driven by, or supported at least by artificial intelligence, would allow to develop several alternatives for corridors and for entire parts of networks. It would allow rating and ranking these alternatives through a set of KPIs that the user would define. It would allow easily testing these alternatives or the preferred alternative in the most accurate and quick way. Finally, it would take full advantage of the huge experience of timetable planners, letting them finalize the draft, modifying them, and running and controlling this whole new process. At Trenolab, we are proud to have developed a working system, a working AI-driven timetable planning tool and process. The process starts with a service concept, with the trains we want to run, how frequently, how important each path is. There are obviously paths that we cannot modify, for example, there are super high priority. There are paths that we can rearrange and move by a certain time, and there are paths that we can insert if there is enough capacity available. The other key brick to start this process is our conventional timetable planning tool, Treno Plus, which has the advantage of using a very detailed model of the network that allows calculating very easily the running times and the headway times, which will be the bricks of our timetable. Within this conventional tool, we have implemented an AI component that uses colony optimization to develop several alternative timetables. Most of these are automatically, let's say, disregarded because they are not optimal in terms of the set of KPIs that we consider. But a set of them, the most performing, they are all finalized and presented to the timetable planner, who can rate them and rank them based on the KPIs and decide which is the most performing. He can then finalize the timetable, editing it as timetable planners have been doing for the last decades until he's happy and push this timetable to be tested in a very accurate microscopic simulation tool. Question might not be, but what are these KPIs? How do we rate this timetable, and how does the optimization work? Here we use ants. What do ants do? An ant goes for searching for food on a random path. Once it has found food, it goes back home and leaves a pheromone path, a pheromone trace behind. So other ants that go for food can follow, at least in part, this first path, and maybe find an even better one using, let's say, taking a deviation at a certain point. Ants traveling can gradually repeat these paths quicker and quicker and gradually improve this path. And the more time passes, the stronger pheromone attract more ants and paths get reinforced. Now, how are these paths, how are these ants converted into our timetable? Each ant run represents a scheduled train. Obviously, food sources are our stations. And these paths are not in the forest, but they are built on our microscopic infrastructure, so on a very accurate one. And obviously, the pheromone is generated by the timetable KPI functions. Which are these KPIs? The KPIs are, I'd say, quite classic for judging or for evaluating a timetable. And thus, first, we have a total travel time of all trains, but trains might be weighted differently if the user wants. So which is the timetable that enables our trains to run faster? Second, how many optional paths can we insert in our timetable? We might decide to want a lot of additional freight paths or to accept a more limited number if the total travel time of trains is shorter. We have a stability parameter that is estimated as the number and criticality of tight sequences between trains, of sequences with a limited buffer time. We can accept or cannot a certain limited number of residual conflicts in certain areas. We can accept that certain trains might see a yellow. Of course, this might not happen on a single track section. And last, we can estimate the total energy consumption that would be caused by our timetable. And other KPIs can be inserted easily. In this slide, or better in an animation that we see in a second, if I manage to find it correctly, hopla, now we see the algorithm running. We see that, sorry, it went forward quite fast. We see how, let's say, while time passes, there are paths that change color and new paths appear. Paths that gradually become green and then blue are the paths with the weakest pheromone, so the worst one, that are replaced by new paths. This process is run in parallel. And then this example on a long single track line in Norway, that's on the line, after 180 runs, we see these three as the most performing paths, that the paths and timetables that the timetable planner receives and can analyze in more detail. If we go back to the presentation, here we see our 4 best performing timetables. How do we rank them? That's pretty easy. We use a radar chart, and we see that here on the left, we have a best performing timetable, except for the number of additional paths, which is very limited. While on the far right, we have the best performing timetable in terms of number of additional paths, but it is not as good in terms of the other KPIs. So if we then want a more balanced solution, we would go for the second or the third alternative. As mentioned, to be able to easily convert a service concept into a timetable draft, we not only need an ant colony generation algorithm, but we also need a very good model of the infrastructure. And in this case, we use the microscopic model of Trenissimo to calculate the running times of all trains, the time losses if the algorithm decides to reroute trains or to add stops for crossings, overtakings, and so on, and the headway times between them. All this is run in a process with one click based on this very reliable model of the network. The same model is also used for the final validation of the preferred draft to estimate its robustness using stochastic microscopic simulation, which is currently the most reliable technique for assessing the quality of a timetable. And here we see this tool in action. Let's try to go quick. We see that it is a fully synchronous simulation tool, that trains run very fast on it, that the network is really detailed. The user has under control everything that is happening on his network. He sees these train graphs being created live. He can highlight signal aspects, highlight and identify conflicts, click on any of the residual conflicts in the simulation to see which is the cause of that conflict, see graphically its impact, rank trains by delay in any place of the network, see how the virtual driver of all trains is driving, how good is a certain train, and so on. All elements that are calculated by the microscopic simulation tool are logged. So at the end of the simulation process, we really have a very advanced and very accurate report of the quality of operations with that timetable, including inputs for predictive maintenance, statistics of energy consumption, and so on. Go back to my presentation. And we have discussed about the early timetable process, but this system can be used fruitfully and conveniently at most stages of planning. For example, it can support the strategic process of identifying the most convenient set of investments on the infrastructure, generating a wide set of drafts where it is possible to see the effective potential of a certain set of investments. It can be used for easily testing strategic timetable scenarios, but also in the very short term to try to insert additional freight paths in an existing timetable or to adapt the timetable to works. How does it work with the same algorithm? Our ants are very flexible, and by modifying the input setting and so the flexibility given to input paths in the service concept, we can solve all these apparently very different problems. In the long-term scenarios, most paths are flexible. In the early timetable, some of them. And then during works, most paths are very slightly flexible, just to consider the extra running time caused by possessions. Concluding, we have managed to implement an AI algorithm and to make it work within an existing commercial timetable planning and simulation suite. And the tool is already in use with the Norwegian Railway Directorate to support the strategic infrastructure and timetable development. While the traditional approach requires a lot of time to create timetable drafts and to test variables and so on, if we introduce AI, we don't replace human timetable planners, but we develop a set of alternatives. We let the algorithm do this bulk work, and we take full advantage of the experience of timetable planners to evaluate these drafts, editing them, and finalizing them. Thank you all for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Georgi. Very interesting. And let's see how the others react to you on the panel. Now it's a pleasure to introduce Kurt Bauer from ÖBB, who is the head of long distance passenger service and who will talk to us about the challenges of international traffic. Before Kurt will present or start his presentation, we will have another poll. And Jules, could I ask you to bring it up? Wonderful. So the second question we have today is, what is most important to you when traveling internationally by train? Is it the travel time from main station to main station? Is it the door-to-door travel time? Is it the price, the onboard services, for example, catering, Wi-Fi, etc., or the onboard features? Can you choose your seat, your compartments? Can you sit together? We've already closed the poll. No, it's still running. I'm sorry, it's still running. And we see that door-to-door travel time is in the lead. Let's give it another few seconds. Okay, we closed the poll, and you can see the results on the right-hand side under polls and closed. And it's pretty close. Yeah, so 39% is the door-to-door travel time. However, still 30% say it's the main station to main station travel time. The price is less important, and even less important are the services and features. Kurt, would you have a reaction to that time is so important and service and features are less so?
Yes, I hope you can hear me. I switched off now my camera because my connection is pretty poor. Could you confirm that you hear me?
We hear you perfectly well.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's what I'm going to speak about now in my presentation, because the travel time is not necessarily the fastest train, but if we don't speak about people who want to go from one capital to another, there's much more to it. And the connectivity of international timetables is definitely important. So I think I'm gonna get in those issues because this was my question, and I'm gonna discuss this now in my presentation.
We're looking forward to it. The floor is yours.
Great. So thank you very much for having me here today. My name is Kurt Bauer, and I'm, as already mentioned, head of the long distance services and as well as of the international long distance services of ÖBB. And as not everybody might know, but ÖBB is one of the most international operators in Europe. Every second long distance train of ÖBB is going abroad. So this is a ratio I guess no other state operator or no other operator has. I would like to speak about two different concepts of international timetabling. One concept you can see here, it's the nightjet. It's a point-to-point connection where you don't have to change trains and where you really go from, on a once-a-day basis, probably twice-a-day basis from one city to another. And you can see here the nightjet network of 2021. And as some of you might have heard in the media already, sales are open since yesterday for the new night train from Vienna to Paris, which will start mid of December, and sales are open already since yesterday. So this is a really point-to-point timetable. Let's go to the next slide, please. And here you've got the idea of the German Transport Ministry, the TEE Reloaded. I'm sure you also heard about this one. And again, you can see it's very long train paths where you've got probably one or two trains going from Paris to Warsaw or from Rome to Amsterdam. By the way, important to mention, at the moment, there's not one single train set in Europe which could manage a through service from Rome to Amsterdam or from Paris to Warsaw. But that's a completely different story. We're talking about timetabling. So one approach of international trains could be making fast services between capitals, long distance, few stops, and pretty much not connected to any other services. This is the approach which you also hear quite often when we speak about corridor approaches and something like that. Let's go to the next slide, please. The different system, and this is done in a lot of countries already quite intensively, is the hub and spoke system, the integrated interval timetable. And you can see here, I start with Austria because there it's easier to explain. You have here the current integrated timetable of Austria, where you've got hubs which are connected either at the hour or half hour or quarter of hour, and where you have real good connections to other services, either long distance services or regional services. Remember the shape, what you see here, and then let's jump on the next page, please. And you can see that it has changed, because in 2028, we will have aligned our infrastructure in a way that we can make the integrated timetable even better. And I think this is my core message. Existing infrastructure is not very often designed to create an integrated timetable for passengers, because you really need, between the nodes, you need certain travel times, half an hour, an hour. Austria is already since the 1990s working on its infrastructure in order to improve the integrated timetable, in order to shorten also travel times, not only city by city, but also region by region, or smaller areas, small villages to other villages. What I'm saying is that one thing, we have to do optimal timetabling on the infrastructure we have. And I think the example before was a good way how you can do that, also with software support. However, there's more to timetabling than just doing timetabling. If you really want to optimize the whole system, you have to work very closely with the infrastructure in order to get the maximum out of the timetable. And I mean, the best example, of course, is Switzerland. They already started in the 1970s to align their infrastructure in order to get an optimum passenger timetable. And I'm speaking about passenger now. I will lose a word on freight afterwards. And Austria is doing this since the 1990s. And the interesting thing is that the Swiss are, not surprisingly, the most heavy rail users in Europe, but actually the Austrians are the second heaviest users in passenger rail. So you can see that this really attracts additional passengers, because it is a benefit for most of the rail travelers. And let's go to the next slide. And now we come to the international context. We are not only thinking in the domestic network. And one thing is very interesting. You always need in a country one node where you start the integrated timetabling. And despite the fact that Vienna is by far the biggest city in Austria, our timetable starts in Salzburg. Our timetable planning starts in Salzburg because we are very depending on the integrated timetable of Germany. So the whole integrated timetable of Austria commence in Salzburg. And what you can see here, we not only think about the Austrian network, but also on the international network. And we've got good connections with Budapest, Prague, Munich, Zurich, where again, the international train feeds into the domestic system. And now it's not so surprising that you only see countries around Austria, and there's not a train from Vienna to Berlin or from Vienna to Copenhagen. Because from our point of view, the frequency that you've got this train every other hour at the same time with the same connections is more important than prestige trains, which run once a day through whole of Europe, because it's a nice story to tell to have those trains. But the benefit to more customers and also to modal shift, I'm convinced, is in the respect of the integrated interval timetable. But and let's go to the next slide. It's not only about timetabling. I've got here a small picture of Austria and the surrounding countries. And in international timetabling, the challenges are actually the coordination among infrastructure managers, because timetabling at the end of the day is also philosophy, and there are different philosophic approaches. And we saw this in the presentation before. You can optimize by capacity, by speed, by number of optional trains, by quality. And there is not this single truth how to do a timetable. And the approach is different in each country. So if you want to have truly an international timetable in a network, it will be very necessary that the infrastructure managers work more closely together. And I would like to give you as an example the engineering and construction works and the according philosophic approach. In Austria, we do timetables for construction 18 months in advance. That means we can plan our trains accordingly, we get the passenger information accordingly, we can sell tickets with the right departure time. However, in the Czech Republic, the infrastructure manager is not very much keen on making engineering timetables, which means that the train if there is construction work on the line from Prague to Austria, trains get delayed randomly at the border. So sometimes they're on time, sometimes they're delayed, which in their approach is the best approach. We have severe problems with that, because the trains coming from Czech Republic are also part of the integrated timetable in Austria. And if those trains are continuously delayed, they really destroy our domestic timetable. So working together with infrastructure, the working of the cooperation of infrastructure managers in order to align construction work, in order to have similar approaches to timetabling. This would really boost also the international train services, because everything is more complex in international train services than in domestic train services. By the way, that's a reason why there are much more domestic trains than international trains. It's simply easier to do it domestically. And the same is unfortunately true for the timetabling. Another and a last point I would like to mention is the stability of the timetable. The more you have a timetable, an integrated interval timetable, the more reliable your trains need to be, because otherwise you really destroy the system. So stability and reliability of the timetable is important, knowing that this could mean that you run less trains, because this is always a discussion. You can fill up the infrastructure up to the maximum capacity, but this will have side effects like less stability. As soon as something goes wrong, it's very difficult that the system again gets into its planned system. Could we go to the next slide, please? Great. And now a last point in international timetabling. It's not only the planning, it's also the operations and the deviations. And there we are internationally very bad, because we often even don't get the on-time or real-time information that the train coming from abroad is delayed. So optimizing the effects of delays and of operational issues gets basically impossible in the international context. And timetable and disposition, so when you run the trains, they always go together. You cannot only speak about timetabling, you always have to speak about the disposition at the end of the day as well, because the customer at the end doesn't care about the planned or theoretical timetable. The customer is really concerned what he experiences when he's on board of an international train. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt, and also thank you for mentioning the Czech Republic and not my mother country, Germany, as importing delays to Austria. As I'm well aware that probably we are importing way more delays to you and giving you a bad headache from time to time. I would now like to invite all of you to our panel, where Stefan from the ERA will join us. Stefan is a project officer for telematics and ERTMS. And given that he hasn't had the chance to present here, I'm eager to know first your reaction, Stefan, to what you've seen. How does that relate to your work at ERA? And if I may go way far into the future, at one point of time, one could imagine that at the moment where you have a stable timetable and you have digital signaling and train automation, the system is running by itself, right?
Might be the case that the system is running by himself. Good morning, everybody. My name is Stefan Jugelt. I'm working for the European Union Agency for Railways, and I'm responsible for the telematics applications. What means telematics applications is something which has a link to all the speeches of the previous speakers, because we are regulating on European scale the IT systems, especially for timetable planning, especially for timetable exchange, for instance, on a regulatory basis, means we define here some standards to exchange data and also to harmonize timetables. So means the problems which have been mentioned by some of the colleagues means how to coordinate cross-border timetables, how to exchange the information between different infrastructure managers is to a certain extent regulated on the European scale, within the European Union, saying we have clear formats, clear business processes implemented in IT, which allows us to harmonize cross-border timetables. Of course, with a lot of manual intervention, of course, with tools like the tool PCS, which has been mentioned by Mats, which is based to a large extent on this regulatory work we are doing here at ERA. So means we have some tools available, means we have already some political will to regulate at least the data exchange on the European scale in place, also to facilitate cross-border timetabling.
Thanks, Stefan. Mats, as Stefan has directly pointed to you, this tool that he mentioned is one thing. The other thing that I have learned when discussing with you before our talk here is that the TTR approach might help in those things in scheduling better trains. What are you doing there in Sweden?
Yeah, I think the concept is fairly well known by at least European attendees of the audience. But in short, TTR is a project to simplify and unify and solidify improvements to the European rail timetabling system to increase the competitiveness of railways. And I think this is to the benefit of the customer. A systematic redesign of the process is needed, as they differ considerably across European countries, as we have heard, which makes international cooperation difficult. Cross-border traffic is very important for the rail sector, but the current system is leading to unnecessary delays due to poorly coordinated construction works and timetable conflicts. And to address this situation, both RailNet Europe, the RNE, and Forum Train Europe, the FT, agreed that changes to these procedures are needed and launched the TTR projects. They are also being supported by the European Rail Freight Association. And without going too much into details, the TTR concept addresses the need for flexibility, especially in the freight sector, possibility for early commercial use of train paths, that is earlier ticket sales, reduction in load peaks and redundant work, and higher stability and quality of timetables. The concept is under implementation in several European markets, and the need for adapting legislation is currently an issue for the European Commission. And of course, Trafikverket has a general positive attitude on TTR, as we perceive the initiative as beneficial for cross-border customers in all segments.
let me link that maybe to a question to Kurt, and I will give you more the opportunity to talk, because I know that you need to leave us at 11:15. Some of us are responsible for running trains, so I'm happy that you take care of that. If we take the TTR system, which, if I understand it correctly, Austria is a pilot region, and we combined it already with a question we have in the chat when we look at the integrated interval timetable that you construct there. How do you manage the process with other operators on the network? Westbahn is especially mentioned, but of course also your foreign counterparts. How would that coordination work again amongst competitors and amongst partners?
Yeah, actually, we are not even. What we do is the second Monday of April, we just submit our timetable wishes to the infrastructure manager. And if there are conflicts, the infrastructure manager is responsible for resolving these conflicts. So we are not kind of cooperating before applying for the path, but the infrastructure manager then has to resolve the problems. And in the network statement, there are clear prioritization rules, which are then applied if there are conflicts. And of course, at the end, it's always also a negotiation result, because both parties or all involved parties will have to find a solution together, but the infrastructure manager is in the lead.
Okay. Mats, talking to you as an infrastructure manager, how do you resolve those conflicts? How do you decide who will run their train?
Well, of course, based on the applications, we also have roundtable discussions for conflict solutions. And due to the open access setup of the Swedish market, any conflicts in the path allocation process have to be settled before finalizing the annual planning. And this is carried out by extensive coordination, I would say, in a number of cases. But there are also some conflicts that cannot be settled, and forcing the Trafikverket to decide the allocation. And this is done by calculation of the socio-economic values of the conflicting train paths. For this, we use socio-economic priority criteria. And the sparse rail network of Sweden reduces the possibility to alter routes, and the route to be selected is more or less given. Thus, scheduling and capacity allocation becomes vital issues. If two conflicting requests for path allocation cannot be coordinated, or as a last resort, the infrastructure is declared congested, and the socio-economic value of each possible solution is used to determine the outcome, and the value of the sum of all individual trains valuation. Summing up all data for a given solution gives a value that can be used for the final allocation decision. So that is how we do it.
Okay, thank you. Giorgio, turning to you, I can imagine that your solution might be helpful for this too, because it's quote unquote just another criteria to feed in. There are a lot of questions about where are you doing what you're doing? Is there a paper describing the algorithm? I leave it to you whether you can answer that there. Bringing the discussion forward, there's one question that I would like to pick on is the tool that you have there, would that allow us to have also a more agile ticketing system in the end? So getting closer to what the airlines do, that you can sell trains 6 months, 12 months in advance and be agile with your simulation?
They definitely say yes. Of course, it's let's say the old process that would need to be streamlined to make that possible. So here we are advancing one brick of, let's say, the long series of bricks that is needed from when you have a timetable in place to when that timetable is translated into available rolling stock, available crews, and so on, and of course ticket sales. But yes, the maximum advantage of the tool would be obtained with a more dynamic timetable planning and selling process.
And if I may pick up on that, your tool allows to calibrate KPIs differently. That was a question from the audience.
Yes, exactly. All the characteristics of the timetable can be a KPI. we are working to include also the utilization of rolling stock. So you could say, okay, I want to have the best performing timetable, also including the fact that I only have 10 EMUs available. In terms of the running time, as said, for example, it is possible to weight differently the extra running time for fast passenger service to the extra running time of freight trains, where we can obviously accept one hour more.
Okay. Kurt, what kind of tools, simulations are you using in Austria to establish this timetable that you've talked about?
Yeah, we use a standard timetabling planning software, actually, so nothing in particular. But honestly, we don't need an agile. If you do an integrated timetable and you align it with infrastructure, which takes years to build, I really don't need much agility in the timetable planning of the yearly timetable, because I already know the timetable for 2029 when the Semmering base tunnel will open pretty much by the minute. I already know this now. However, where I really need agility is when we have deviation in operations. There's the real problem, because there we get lost and there is no optimization, neither with the resources, nor with the passengers, nor whatsoever. But again, this is the different approach, because we have a long time planning, infrastructure, and timetabling. There are different philosophies. And if you do a timetable every year again, and you really go with the passenger demand, then you, of course, need an agile timetable. And you will always need it for freight, for sure, because freight is not stable. Freight, you need timetables changes, I guess, every day, basically. So it's always important of whom are we speaking about and who needs what from the timetabling. I need stability much more than anything else. I don't need the maximum speed. I need the maximum stability for my integrated timetable.
Thank you. That was very helpful to highlight those different philosophies. Stefan, you have the broader European view. Would you say there are, and I would now say the Austrian-Swiss philosophy already enabled, the Germans who are trying to enable something by 2030 in this kind of way? Are there different approaches across Europe? How do you see that?
Yes, this is, as Kurt explained, a part of the problems, these different philosophies, which might work on a domestic level, but lead to problems on cross-border trains. For instance, if you integrate cross-border trains following two different philosophies in your domestic network, because you have to cover also some transport demand in your domestic network, this might lead to problems from the point of view of the timetabling, because a regular timetable needs much more higher qualities than a point-to-point timetable, where you have almost no interchanges between two trains. Therefore, we have presented last year a paper for the Green Deal of the European Union and made a proposal for that. Because, for instance, in airline industry, in airline management, you have an entity called Eurocontrol. This Eurocontrol controls the European airspace, coordinates between the different airspaces of the member states, or creates a unified airspace. What is missing for the international rail coordination? A similar entity to coordinate cross-border trains. And we called it Eurocontrol for Rail, saying, okay, this could be such an entity coordinating those cross-border trains, for instance, passenger trains, overall in Europe, to avoid that those philosophies, which still remain on some member states for sure, can create some trouble in other member states, saying, okay, then the timetables do not match to each other and may create problems for the passengers and freight forwarders. And therefore, our proposal is, let's think about such an Eurocontrol for rail to harmonize the cross-border traffic and to coordinate it better.
Mats, Kurt, your reactions from two member states to this Eurocontrol? Do you think it's a good idea? Let's start with Sweden.
Well, within the TTR concept, there is some thoughts about the international leading entity in the planning process, not as far as the operational process, but obviously Europe has to be coordinated in some way or the other, settling conflict. So I think it's an interesting path to follow and pursue.
Good. I direct that question to you, and I link it to a question from the audience that especially is asking for how to integrate night jets, night trains, and other open access operators that come internationally. So, is the Eurocontrol for trains a good idea, or how would you address the problem?
I think the Eurocontrol will also not give an answer on, is it more important that the night jet arrives at 7 o'clock in the morning in Köln Hauptbahnhof, or is it more important that the commuters get to the workplace every day in the morning at 7 a.m.? Because we have a capacity constraint, and there is a conflict where there is no right or wrong in itself. Because if I'm a daily commuter, I wouldn't accept that my train now takes 15 minutes longer because there's a night jet coming. On the other hand, the night jet is an international product, and that's what we want in Europe. We want to connect Europe on rail. So this conflict will also be difficult to solve, I guess, for the Eurocontrol, for the rail Eurocontrol. I think we need at the end of the day, it needs to be a political discussion. What is more important to us?
Understood. Georgie, there is quite some questions in the chat, and I try to fire them a bit to you if that's okay. There is one question: where actually is your solution in use? Can you talk about some reality cases where you have implemented it?
Yeah, it is currently in use in Norway, as said, for the strategic and coordinated development of infrastructure and timetables. Basically, thanks to the tool, it is possible to identify a very broad set of potential investments and to see which is the benefit of the combination of these investments, which is something that without AI support would really take years. And most probably you wouldn't test all of them. You would a priori strongly reduce the set and say, okay, no, all these scenarios are not relevant. Here you can test all of them, you can rank all of them. Second use of this is now with a few of our clients in the United Kingdom, where these tools are used to support the, let's say, refinement of the timetable. So a completely different use. So we receive still raw timetables, in the sense of timetables that still contain conflicts and so on. We use the tool to clean them up and to test them using simulation afterwards.
Thank you. When you were talking about the simulations that you're running, there's one question: how long does it take to run 100 iterations of ARMS for a typical corridor?
For a corridor, 100 ARMS would take typically, I would say, half an hour. For one of these very long single track lines in Norway, it would probably take twice for a long double track. Then obviously it would be more if from a corridor we go into, let's say, a full part of the network. But still, at the end, you get a set of proposals and you can see all of them, you can see their details and so on. So it is really a fraction of what it would take manually.
Yeah, and then let's finish with the last technical question. It's the question whether there is an incentive for the ARMS to meet at stations to secure connectivity. I would imagine you just given a KPI for that or something like that.
Exactly. It is an easy to add KPI, also weighting potentially the most important connections. In terms of what you mentioned before of all details will be presented, we are lucky, this afternoon in a scientific webinar. So all participants that are interested in understanding how the algorithm works, all the mathematics behind, and the details of how it runs in the real examples are invited to join.
Okay. There are some questions, Mats, that are going about that it's a lot of bureaucracy and paperwork to do all those alignments. What's your horizon to support that even, and I know that you have tools behind that, but what's your horizon to support that even more by tools, and maybe have also some kind of interactive, even booking solution where you can get a direct answer and some other stuff where you say, okay, the operators will come back to you and give you a reply tomorrow, something like this. Do you have that, let's say, a digitalization roadmap for scheduling?
Yes, we have. We have a scheme coming up with implementing more digital tools for our planning process, and they will ease up the communication mostly, but basically it's about communication and trying to solve conflicting interests and so on. And of course, in the planning process, especially in the long term planning, there are some bureaucracy, but of course that is on the government level and for the whole society, and that is of course a quite slow process, because these are big investments and had to be considered thoroughly. So I think there's a lot of things to do, especially in the short term planning.
Yep, indeed. Giorgio, there are some questions. If you were describing the strategic case. Is there a way to use these algorithms really in daily dispositioning and operations, so to offer support to the train controller? If some trains are late, what is now the best way to get back to whatever kind of predetermined schedule?
Yes, I'd say so. At the same time, the algorithm might probably need to be formulated, or might need to be adapted in that case. So not just the parameters, to be able to give a good answer in less than half an hour. Because in that case, we would really need it in seconds. And so maybe you don't need it to be really the optimal, but to be a working solution in the shortest possible time.
Good. If you are still with us, I would have one last question before you leave us.
Go ahead.
How do you look at that digitization roadmap for scheduling, but also, like we just discussed, the disposition of trains and how you try to get out delays of the system? What is ÖBB doing there?
Yeah, we are actually working on a project which we call automated resource planning, where we really try to optimize especially the disposition, because at the moment we measure train delays, but actually nobody cares about train delays. Actually, the right indicator would be passenger minute delays, because in some cases a train delay doesn't mean anything, because the other way he reaches the connection anyway, and in the other you have a 5-minute delay of a train, but he has to wait another hour for the next service. So that's one thing we look into it, to minimize not the minutes of train delays, but to minimize the minutes of passenger delays. And the second thing is also the optimization of resources. If a train is heavily delayed, sometimes it might make sense to cut the train and send it back on time, knowing that some passengers will have to get off and not reach their final destination with this particular train, but having to change to another train. And it ends with the disposition of local drivers and
Yeah. Good. Now we're no longer hearing you. But I think if I interpret what you want to say, it ends with the disposition of locomotive drivers, which you cannot ignore either, because you need to assure that those trains that you have dispatched are able to be run. So it's not only the tracks and the paths on the infrastructure, but it's also the whole question of workforce management behind it. Giorgio, the story of your company and the startup is impressive. It's, as I said at the beginning, for me, it was more an art than a science, looking at all those schedules. What are the next steps that you're planning? So how are you projecting what you're doing into the future?
Oh, nice question. Thanks, Karsten. I think that we need to, let's say, get more experience from the use of this type of algorithms to be able to, let's say, more easily insert KPIs there that are relevant, to really be able to translate the business logic of railways into these KPIs, and thus into a way to get these drafts done quickly and evaluated as quickly. And then, of course, the next step, as you mentioned before, would be to trial using AI to support real-time dispatching, in particular in events or in event of disruptions, as mentioned by Kurt.
Okay. Mats, what would be most helpful for you? So if you have Giorgio here, in terms of digital solutions support, what kind of, I don't know, 2-3 major dreams you have that could make your life easier?
I think a general improvement in the construction phase of the timetables as a tool for the process, and I think we have a lot to do in this area using AI, of course. So you made a very impressive presentation. I'm looking forward to further information about it.
Wonderful.
Thanks a lot.
Still have some questions for Ira here. Unfortunately, Stefan is no longer with us. At least I don't see him. Let me maybe take up with you, Giorgio, when you developed this algorithm, can you take us a little bit into the, let's say, the shop floor of programming? How does that work? Did you really look at this? I mean, the Arndt story, I like it. It's a fantastic story to explain what's happening. Was that at the beginning of your exercise, or is it more explaining afterwards? So how do you get into a topic like this?
Let's say I can, let's say the Ant colony generation is something, of course, that has been there for a while and used for optimal path search. So we were looking for a way of supporting timetable planning and not replacing human timetable planners, because timetable planning algorithms have been there for 30 years and in fact used in practice only almost at the scientific level. So we wanted something that was collaborative with timetable planners and with potential clients. And this type of algorithms, as you have seen, develops multiple alternatives, can be integrated in the regular tools, and leaves the ultimate choice to the timetable planner, which is what we wanted. And that's the advantage. It doesn't tell you this is the best alternative. It gives you 10 alternatives, it ranks them, and then you are free to choose one that would not appear as the best at the first glance, but that you know, reading its KPIs and then analyzing it in more detail, that it is the best for your case.
Okay, understood. Mats, you were talking about in the beginning what quite struck me, that freight traffic in Sweden has been stable or even picked up a little bit. How do you explain that? If we look at other European countries, so Germany is struggling quite a bit. In the UK, it has seen a massive decline. In France, also. What does Sweden do better overall, but also from a timetabling perspective, to keep up that level of freight?
I think partially it's a determination by the government and the transport administration to support environmental friendly modes of transport. And that's go for sea transport and goes for rail transport and so on. In various means trying to support it. And it's a sort of a balanced prioritization for the transport modes. But in general, companies have been successful and increased international trade and so on. So that has also added. But as you saw, we are very vulnerable to economic crisis and such things. It shows in the statistics up front.
Yeah, and I know that, I don't know the Swedish system that well, but if I look at the corridors more in Central Europe, you have that conflict between passenger rail, which is already blocking more or less the network in daytime, and you have a hard time to slot in freight trains. And now even, I mean, the European Night Train Initiative is a great one, but when I talk to my freight rail clients, they are quite concerned where they will get their trains through.
Yeah. Of course, it's a problem to balance the demands of the customers in that way. But when it comes to freight, I think import and export has been it has been prioritized by the government. So I think that's an explanation for the figures.
Thank you. And Georgia, I would assume you can include CO2 reduction, modal attractivity, etc., as KPIs also in your modeling.
Yes.
So it seems for looking at a strategic way also to reconcile the needs of freight of different types of trains international. This is a fact-based simulation that can help afterwards the political discussions. I think this is a bit where I would like to conclude for today. Thanks a lot, first to the two people who needed to leave us for their insights and inputs. Mats, for your perspective from Sweden, Giorgio for the answers and the technical outlook. There's lots of things to do, but I think if we want to have a Europe that is even more attractive on train for the transport of freight, but also for the transport of passengers, we need to get to solutions like this one to be more informed, to be faster, and also more transparent in decision making. Thanks a lot to everyone. Thanks for the audience for the questions. And now I think I hand over to Jules to close us and tell us what's up next.
Yes, thank you very much, Carsten, and thank you to all the speakers for this very insightful and very fruitful debate, and I think we had some some good kind of progress in this area, and it's nice to have a bit of a lesson in zoology as well from Giorgio. So just on that note, I think Giorgio's colleague has just sent a link about this afternoon's Trenolab talk. I think the more scientific discussion that Giorgio was talking about in the Q&A section. So there's a link to that if any of the audience members are interested in joining that session. So do look out for that. Now, so we have, if my colleagues could put the slides for future webinars. So we're now talking, yes, thank you. So the next webinar will be on the 18th of October. So this will be second installment of the two-part session that we're working with Cognify on. How can we minimize the impact of incidents on rail operators and infrastructure owners? So there may be sort of slight connection to what we were talking about in terms of timetabling. But when there's a major disaster, such as earthquake or flooding or something like that, or perhaps rail accidents, how can we minimize the impact of incidents? So we will be joined by Frederick Enon from UIC, Mark Christel from Cognify, and moderator is Paolo Grilli-Minetti from PwC. We're expecting a couple more speakers to confirm in the next few days. So do look out for that. And the webinars are already available to register on our website. So just to give you information about our events, sort of a little bit longer away in February. So we are hoping to go back to the physical event happening now in Berlin. So this is the 11th edition of the International Railway Summit. We have an exciting range of speakers confirmed, and the list of speakers are available on our website. So do have a look at iris.org for the latest list of speakers. Also, we organize one-to-one meetings between rail operators, infrastructure owners, and solution providers, as some of you know. So do get in touch with us if you're interested in taking part in the summit. And finally, we have launched a couple of weeks ago a new awards, International Sustainable Railway Awards, together with the UIC. And this is to recognize all the work that is being done by rail operators and infrastructure owners on different types of sustainability, so social, environmental, and economic sustainability. And the idea is to learn from each other and perhaps sort of engage with the kind of projects and new ideas happening in different areas of the world, so that we can all collaborate and work together on this fight against climate change. So this application is open to rail operators, infrastructure owners, and authorities until the 12th of November. So do join this website to apply, and the sponsorship options are available to solution providers who are providing sustainable solutions for the railway sector. And the ceremony will take place in the same week as the summit on the 17th of February in Berlin. So I hope to see many of you at this presentation ceremony and gala dinner as well. So that's everything from my side. And so thank you very much to all of the speakers this morning, Mats Berlin, Kurt Bauer, Giorgio Mereossi, and Stefan Jugelt. And thank you, of course, to the moderator for skillfully navigating the sort of the waters, or let's say the track of the international timetabling debate. Karsten Lotz, so thank you for your moderatorship. So on that note, thank you to the audience. Thank you once again to TrainerLab for making this webinar possible. And I hope to see many of you at the next webinar in October. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a good rest of the day. Have a good afternoon, and goodbye.
Thank you, Jules. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.